Transcendental sexology can be studied from two angles. One is the official point of view, as taught in universities, faculties of medicine, etc. The other is the Gnostic point of view. I will explain sexology in the light of universal Gnosticism. First of all, Gnosis means knowledge. The word gnosis appears even in official science, diagnosis, diagnostic. In etymology, one can see the word gnosis. The Gnostic movements know sexology profoundly. In the name of truth, I must say that Sigmund Freud, with his psychoanalysis, initiated an era of extraordinary transformations in the field of sexology. Freud innovated medicine, and this is known by all who have studied his work. Alfred Adler was certainly one of his best disciples. Carl Gustav Jung was also his disciple, along with many other psychologists, psychoanalysts, and parapsychologists. Sex itself is the center of gravity of human activity. Around sex gravitate all aspects of social life. Observe a dance, a party. The entire gathering gravitates around sex. The same occurs in a cafe. Everything gravitates around sex. Today, sex has begun to be studied by some wise men with transcendental purposes. Unfortunately, there is an abundance of pornography, and sex has been deviated toward mere sensual activity. There are different classes of sex. There exist normal sexuality, infrasexuality, and suprasexuality. What is normal sexuality? Normal sexuality is sexual activity oriented toward the reproduction of the species. Infrasexuality is different. There are two classes of infrasexuality. In the field of Kabbalah, it is said that Adam had two wives, Lilith and Nahima. Lilith represents the sphere of infrasexuality. Within this sphere, we find pederasts, homosexuals, lesbians, etc. On the side of Nahima are the abusers of sex, pornographers, those who subject themselves to lust without any kind of control. These are the two spheres of infrasexuality. Normal sex, I repeat, is related to the reproduction of the species. Sexual pleasure is something legitimate. Those who believe that sexual pleasure is a sin, who classify it as a taboo, or who believe it is something shameful, are absolutely mistaken. I repeat, sexual pleasure is legitimate and must not be despised, undermined, or labeled a taboo. One has the right to sexual joy. But let us think about suprasex, about suprasexuality. Undoubtedly, suprasexuality is for geniuses, for transcendental men, for ineffable women, etc. Jesus of Nazareth, Buddha, Hermes Trismegiст, Muhammad, Lao Tse in China, Quetzalcoatl among us Mexicans, Pythagoras, etc. were suprasexual men. All of us can enter the kingdom of suprasexuality. However, in order to enter the sphere of suprasexuality, it is first necessary to attain normal sexuality. Infrasexuals, such as lesbians, homosexuals, pederasts, and masturbators, are not prepared to enter the kingdom of suprasexuality. If an infrasexual wishes to regenerate himself, he must begin by attaining normal sexuality. Once this has been achieved, he can then fully enter the path of suprasexuality. Regeneration for homosexuals and lesbians belonging to the sphere of infrasexuality is difficult. Not long ago, a homosexual visited me. He came from Honduras. This man possessed a very high intellectual culture and liked the revolutionary ideas of sexology as taught by universal Gnosticism. He told me his tragic history as a homosexual. However, he also expressed his desire for regeneration so that he might enter the field of normal sexuality, and later the path of suprasexuality. I wish him regeneration. On another occasion, a lesbian came seeking my counsel. She told me that she liked women, that she had a serious problem because she was spending much money on a certain woman, and this woman was, as we say, deceiving her. Certainly, the woman of her dreams had been seen in the street with other women, and this situation caused her jealousy. The poor lesbian suffered like a man. She cried, begged, and asked for counsel like a man. I could not help but feel repugnance. Nevertheless, I gave her advice. I told her that the best thing for her was regeneration, to find a man, to enter the path of normal sexuality, etc. I do not know if that poor woman regenerated herself, but it did not seem to me that she truly desired regeneration, because she was deeply jealous of her partner and of the other women who accompanied her. She behaved exactly like a macho, no more, no less.
Observe how horrible the path of degeneration is, the infrasexual way. But in truth, infrasexuals are not only lesbians, homosexuals, masturbators, etc. No, infrasexuals are also those who abuse sex, those who constantly change partners, those who copulate even 10 to 15 times a day. And there are people like that. I know them. Undoubtedly, such people are degenerated. They are infrasexuals, even if they believe themselves to be very masculine. Let us now enter the path of normal sexuality. Normal sexuality is something beautiful. Man and woman unite, love each other, reproduce the species, live a moderate life, etc. They live, this is something you must understand, according to the interests of nature. Each one of us is a small machine, we cannot deny it, that captures certain types and subtypes of cosmic energy. Each small machine, each one of us, captures these types of cosmic or universal energy, transforms them automatically, and subconsciously retransmits them to the inner layers of the earth. Thus, the earth itself is a living organism, an organism that lives because of us. I do not mean by this that plants do not fulfill the same function. Clearly, each plant, according to its species, captures specific types of cosmic vibrations, transforms them, and sends them to the inner layers of the planetary organism. Thus, the earth is a living organism. We reproduce ourselves incessantly through normal sexuality, and this is necessary for the economy of nature. Sexual joy is a legitimate joy. It is not a crime nor a transgression, as many sanctimonious, crack-brained, and pietistic people believe. However, with normal sexuality, we live according to the economic interests of nature. Another matter entirely is suprasexuality. To enter the field of suprasexuality is to enter the path of extraordinary transformations. Friedrich Nietzsche, in his book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, speaks of the Superman. The time of the Superman has arrived. Man is only a bridge between the animal and the Superman, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous looking back. Everything in him is dangerous. The time of the Superman has arrived. Hitler interpreted Nietzsche in his own way. During the Second World War, even the most insignificant German policeman was considered a Superman. No one felt small in Hitler's Germany. Everyone was a Superman. It seems that Hitler, even with good intentions, did not know how to interpret Nietzsche. I say frankly that I believe in the Superman, but I think Hitler took the wrong path. It is possible to attain the heights of the Superman, but this is only possible through the transmutation of sexual energies, and this belongs to the field of suprasexuality. In the human being, there are 5 fundamental centers: the intellectual center, which you use the most for study; the emotional center, located in the heart; the motor center, located in the upper part of the spinal column; the instinctive center, located in the lower part of the spinal column, and the sexual center. I repeat so that you may retain it in memory: intellectual, emotional, motor, instinctive, and sexual. These centers are fundamental to human activity. Regarding the sexual center, I want to tell you that it is the center around which all human activities gravitate. Thought appears to be very fast, but unfortunately it is very slow. If you are driving a car and suddenly face a moment of danger and you begin analyzing what to do, whether to move forward or pass another car, to reverse or apply the brakes, you crash and catastrophe follows. The motor center is faster. When driving, there is no time to think. One acts quickly and overcomes the danger. But if thought intervenes at that moment, the result is an accident. How many times while driving does indecision arise? Should I turn right or left? And the result is failure. Thus, the thinking center is very slow. The motor center is faster. The emotional center is also fast, but there is none faster than the sexual center. A man sees a woman and in a thousandth of a second knows whether she harmonizes with him. All of this occurs in a fraction of a second. You young people know this. You can stand before a woman and instinctively, automatically know whether she matches your own wave. This happens extremely fast. It is a center that registers the opposite pole with extraordinary speed. Let us now analyze other factors. Many times, a man lives happily with his wife and loves her, yet he feels that something is missing. It can happen that he does not feel complete with her. She may fulfill the needs of the emotional center, but not harmonize intellectually, or perhaps they do not match sexually. When he encounters another woman who does harmonize with him, what is called adultery then occurs. I do not come to speak about adultery. On a certain occasion, there was a place where many adulterers were drinking heavily. One of them, intoxicated with wine, said, "Hurrah for adultery!" No, I do not come to praise adultery, because that would be absurd, but I do observe the causes of adultery. Many times one member of a couple does not have affinity with the other on the level of the 5 centers, and it is possible that such affinity is found in another person. This is the origin of what is known as adultery. Let us suppose the case of a man who compliments himself with a woman emotionally, but not sexually. It may happen that he finds a woman who compliments him sexually. Let us suppose that a man compliments himself mentally with a woman, but not emotionally. It can happen that he finds a woman who compliments him emotionally. It can also happen that in the world of habits, a man does not compliment himself with his wife, but finds in that same world of habits, related to the motor center, another woman with whom he truly compliments himself, with whom he feels affinity. This is the intrinsic cause of so many adulteries that lead to divorce. As I have said, I do not come to praise adultery, because that would be absurd, and I do not agree either with that woman who, at a celebrated orgy, shouted, "Hurrah for adultery!" No, my friends, I do not agree with that. I am simply studying the sexual field together with you, and we cannot omit adultery itself from this study. I believe that the best course is for a man to find a woman who complements him in the intellectual center, the emotional center, the motor center or world of habits, the instinctive center, and the sexual center. That is to say, the ideal couple, the perfect one. Likewise, I believe it would be ideal for a woman to find a man with whom she can fully complement herself. Only then can true happiness exist. One of the serious reasons why happiness cannot exist lies in the field of temperaments. A man of ardent temperament cannot be happy with a woman who is like a block of ice. The mere act of kissing her, only to discover that she does not desire kisses, is already serious. Now, what can be said about copulation, about the moment of copulation with a cold woman? Remember the book Siloe, the Egyptian. In ancient Egypt, there were places for the mummification of bodies, dirty places where cadavers were embalmed. Those who worked there carried the stench of putrefaction wherever they went, and no woman liked men who smelled so foul. Do you know what those embalmers used to do while surrounded by putrefaction? They copulated with the cadavers of women delivered to those places. Do you think such an act is pleasant, to copulate with cadavers? This occurred in Egypt. What then would you say of a man of ardent temperament forced to copulate with a woman of ice, with a cadaver? That is frightfully horrible. It is absolutely true that there exists what we may call the bilious temperament, heavy, torpid individuals. For example, a woman of torpid temperament, slow in movement and heavy in nature, cannot possibly match with someone of nervous temperament. Impossible. Likewise, it is impossible for a man of nervous temperament to match with an ardent woman. Thus, temperaments are of great importance. It is not enough to have affinity among the different centers of the organic machine, intellect, emotion, movement, instinct, and sex, but there must also be affinity of temperaments. Only in this way, through both temperamental affinity and perfect interrelation among the different centers, can authentic affinity exist, the kind that brings happiness. Up to this point, I have been speaking of normal sexuality. My friends, suprasexuality is different. In order to enter the field of suprasexuality, it is first necessary to transmute creative energy. We must think of sex not only as something physiological. You must understand that within sex exists energy. Einstein said, energy equals mass multiplied by the square of the speed of light. He also said, energy transforms itself into mass, and mass transforms itself into energy. Is it possible to transform mass into energy? Of course. Observe what happens to a puddle of water on the highway. With the warmth of the sun, the water dries up and finally becomes clouds, and in its ultimate synthesis, energy in lightning and thunder. All the waters of oceans and rivers become clouds and ultimately lightning and thunder, that is to say, energy. The same occurs with the ens seminis. What is the ens seminis? It is the entity of the semen, that is to say, the sacred sperm. Today, there exists a tendency to consider sperm merely as a substance excreted by the sexual endocrine glands. The word sacred in relation to sperm seems out of fashion. However, if you study Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis carefully, you will find that he states religions in their ultimate synthesis have a sexual origin. I agree with Freud in this sense. If you agree, good. If you do not, that is fine as well. When one observes the religions of indigenous peoples, for example, the religions of various Indo-American, African, or Asian tribes, one can directly verify that in all these religions and cults, there is a fusion of the sexual and the mystical, that is, the erotic and the religious. Gods and goddesses appear in erotic postures, copulating. What is most interesting is that such postures were sacred in the land of the Vedas. Among the Trojans, there existed practices that might be considered merely lustful, but in Crete there were great processions in which priestesses walked carrying enormous phalluses. In those times, the phallus was not regarded as something vulgar, as it is today, but was the object of true worship. The yoni, that is to say, the feminine sexual organ, also received worship. There is no doubt that the lance with which Longinus is said to have wounded the side of Christ is the living representation of the phallus. There is likewise no doubt that the cup, chalice, or Holy Grail, for which the knights of the Middle Ages fought when they went to the Holy Land during the Eucharistic Crusades, represents the feminine yoni, the eternal feminine. Thus, in the field of suprasexuality, the chalice and the lance are sacred. The sperm is sacred because within the sperm is contained our own personality. The medieval alchemists saw in the sperm the vitriol, that is to say, visita interiore terram, rectificando invenies occultum lapidem,
Visit the interior of the earth, and by rectifying, you will find the hidden stone. But what is the stone of which the medieval alchemists spoke? It is the famous philosopher's stone. That stone must be fabricated, and there is no doubt that formulas exist for its fabrication. I believe in the philosopher's stone, but it must be made. Through the sacred sperm and its transmutations, it is possible to attain the philosopher's stone. The transmutation of the sexual libido can transform the sperm into energy when the key is known. What truly matters is to know the key. If with the ens seminis we can procreate a child, if with the ens seminis we reproduce the species, if with the ens seminis we can populate the earth with millions of human beings, then, as a matter of fact, with the ens seminis, that is to say, with the entity of the semen, we can give life to ourselves and become true supermen in the most complete sense of the word. Now, what truly matters is to achieve the transmutation of the sexual libido. Through transmutation, we cerebralize the semen and seminalize the cerebrum. It becomes necessary to seminalize the cerebrum, gentlemen, because it is well known to scientists that not all areas of our brain are functioning. Today, it is known in medicine that only a minimal part of our brain fulfills its functions. Undoubtedly, we have many inactive areas. If, with the small active portion of our brain, we have created atomic spacecraft that traveled to the moon, invented the atomic bomb that destroyed the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and developed supersonic airplanes that travel at extraordinary speed, what would be possible if all parts of our brain were activated, if the totality of the encephalic mass were functioning? Then we could transform this world and make something marvelous of it. Therefore, it is necessary to regenerate and seminalize the brain, to cerebralize the semen and seminalize the cerebrum. That is the key. Is it possible to seminalize the cerebrum? The great musicians of the past, such as Beethoven, Chopin, and Liszt, were men who possessed a highly seminalized brain. They were men who endowed their brains with extraordinary capacities and utilized a greater percentage of their cerebral areas. However, things are very different today. The human brain has greatly degenerated, and we do not realize it. If we are in the middle of a party, in tune with the latest trend, immersed in rock and roll, and suddenly someone removes the record and plays Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, how would you feel? Certainly, you would no longer continue the party. What would you do? You would not insult the host, but you would leave the house, would you not? Why? In the Middle Ages, when the brain had not degenerated as much as it has today, things were different. People danced waltzes or moved to the rhythm of classical music. Musicians played exquisite symphonies during banquets. In those times, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, and Liszt were immensely popular. That was the Middle Ages, gentlemen, but we no longer live in those times. Today, if someone plays that kind of music, we say goodbye and leave. Why? Because we become bored. And why do we become bored? Let us analyze, for we are here to analyze. Simply because the brain has degenerated. Certain areas are no longer capable of appreciating fine music. Why has the brain degenerated? It has degenerated because for many centuries we have been extracting from our organism the entity of the semen. We have not extracted it solely to give life to other beings. No, we have extracted it for pleasure alone, because it is pleasurable and nothing more. We have satisfied lust in beds of pleasure, but the one who paid the price has been the brain, and now many of its areas no longer function. Yes, it is possible to regenerate it, but in order to regenerate it, it is necessary to transmute the entity of the semen, to transform it into energy. Only in this way can we cerebralize the semen. What remains for us in this lecture is to explain how this can be done. I will have the pleasure of explaining to you a very singular artifice that medieval alchemists taught their disciples. This artifice was also taught by modern scientists such as Brown-Séquard in the United States. It was also taught by Crum Heller, doctor and colonel of our glorious Mexican army, by Jung, and it is taught in Asiatic schools of Oriental Tantrism. This is not something exclusive to me, nor something I invented. I learned it from those wise men, and I transmit it to you, not as an article of faith or as an unbreakable dogma. No, if you wish to accept it, do so. If you do not wish to accept it, then do not. Many schools have accepted it, many have rejected it. Each person is free to think as they wish. I am simply giving you my modest opinion. This is the artifice, the connection of the lingam yoni. Lingam, as you already know, is the phallus. Yoni, as you already know, is the uterus, the eternal feminine, the organ of the female sexual. The connection of the lingam yoni without the ejaculation of the entity of the semen. Dr. Crum Heller used to give the key in Latin, saying, Immissio membri virilis in vagina femina, sine ejaculationem semini.
The yoni, that is to say, the feminine sexual organ, also received worship. There is no doubt that the lance with which Longinus is said to have wounded the side of Christ is the living representation of the phallus. There is likewise no doubt that the cup, chalice, or Holy Grail, for which the knights of the Middle Ages fought when they went to the Holy Land during the Eucharistic Crusades, represents the feminine yoni, the eternal feminine. Thus, in the field of suprasexuality, the chalice and the lance are sacred. The sperm is sacred because within the sperm is contained our own personality. The medieval alchemists saw in the sperm the vitriol, that is to say, visita interiore terram, rectificando invenies occultum lapidem. Visit the interior of the earth, and by rectifying you will find the hidden stone. But what is the stone of which the medieval alchemists spoke? It is the famous philosopher's stone. That stone must be fabricated, and there is no doubt that formulas exist for its fabrication. I believe in the philosopher's stone, but it must be made. Through the sacred sperm and its transmutations, it is possible to attain the philosopher's stone. The transmutation of the sexual libido can transform the sperm into energy when the key is known. What truly matters is to know the key. If with the ens seminis we can procreate a child, if with the ens seminis we reproduce the species, if with the ens seminis we can populate the earth with millions of human beings, then, as a matter of fact, with the ens seminis, that is to say, with the entity of the semen, we can give life to ourselves and become true supermen in the most complete sense of the word. Now, what truly matters is to achieve the transmutation of the sexual libido. Through transmutation, we cerebralize the semen and seminalize the cerebrum. It becomes necessary to seminalize the cerebrum, gentlemen, because it is well known to scientists that not all areas of our brain are functioning. Today, it is known in medicine that only a minimal part of our brain fulfills its functions. Undoubtedly, we have many inactive areas. If, with the small active portion of our brain, we have created atomic spacecraft that traveled to the moon, invented the atomic bomb that destroyed the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and developed supersonic airplanes that travel at extraordinary speed, what would be possible if all parts of our brain were activated, if the totality of the encephalic mass were functioning? Then we could transform this world and make something marvelous of it. Therefore, it is necessary to regenerate and seminalize the brain, to cerebralize the semen and seminalize the cerebrum. That is the key. Is it possible to seminalize the cerebrum? The great musicians of the past, such as Beethoven, Chopin, and Liszt, were men who possessed a highly seminalized brain.
They were men who endowed their brains with extraordinary capacities and utilized a greater percentage of their cerebral areas. However, things are very different today. The human brain has greatly degenerated, and we do not realize it. If we are in the middle of a party, in tune with the latest trend, immersed in rock and roll, and suddenly someone removes the record and plays Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, how would you feel? Certainly, you would no longer continue the party. What would you do? You would not insult the host, but you would leave the house, would you not? Why? In the Middle Ages, when the brain had not degenerated as much as it has today, things were different. People danced waltzes or moved to the rhythm of classical music. Musicians played exquisite symphonies during banquets. In those times, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, and Liszt were immensely popular. That was the Middle Ages, gentlemen, but we no longer live in those times. Today, if someone plays that kind of music, we say goodbye and leave. Why? Because we become bored. And why do we become bored? Let us analyze, for we are here to analyze. Simply because the brain has degenerated, certain areas are no longer capable of appreciating fine music. Why has the brain degenerated? It has degenerated because for many centuries we have been extracting from our organism the entity of the semen. We have not extracted it solely to give life to other beings. No, we have extracted it for pleasure alone, because it is pleasurable and nothing more. We have satisfied lust in beds of pleasure, but the one who paid the price has been the brain, and now many of its areas no longer function. Yes, it is possible to regenerate it, but in order to regenerate it, it is necessary to transmute the entity of the semen, to transform it into energy. Only in this way can we cerebralize the semen. What remains for us in this lecture is to explain how this can be done. I will have the pleasure of explaining to you a very singular artifice that medieval alchemists taught their disciples. This artifice was also taught by modern scientists such as Brown-Séquard in the United States. It was also taught by Crum Heller, doctor and colonel of our glorious Mexican army, by Jung, and it is taught in Asiatic schools of Oriental Tantrism. This is not something exclusive to me, nor something I invented. I learned it from those wise men, and I transmit it to you, not as an article of faith or as an unbreakable dogma. No, if you wish to accept it, do so. If you do not wish to accept it, then do not. Many schools have accepted it. Many have rejected it. Each person is free to think as they wish. I am simply giving you my modest opinion. This is the artifice, the connection of the lingam yoni. Lingam, as you already know, is the phallus. Yoni, as you already know, is the uterus, the eternal feminine, the organ of the female sexual. The connection of the lingam yoni without the ejaculation of the entity of the semen. Dr. Crum Heller used to give the key in Latin, saying, "Immissio membri virilis in vagina femina, sine ejaculationem semini."
Some modern scientists have accepted this key. The Oneida community in the United States experimented with this formula. Observe what they did in the Oneida community. About 25 couples began working with sex. They were instructed to copulate for a certain period of time, but without the ejaculation of the entity of the semen. They were then subjected to clinical studies. It was observed that there was a complete semenization of the brain, an increase of hormones in the blood, a complete improvement of the organism, a strengthening of sexual potency, and the disappearance of many illnesses. When the scientists decided that it was necessary to procreate children, they then granted permission to copulate with seminal ejaculation. In any case, the interesting point of this ancient artifice, which constitutes the secretum secretorum of the medieval alchemists, is that the sexual glands never reach degeneration. You know very well that when the sexual glands degenerate, the hypophysis and the glands of internal secretion also degenerate. The entire nervous system then undergoes processes of degeneration, and decrepitude and death follow. Why does old age exist?
Because the sexual glands have become decrepit. When the sexual glands become decrepit, all the endocrine glands also become decrepit, and then the process of decrepitude and old age appears. However, if a system existed that would prevent the degeneration and decrepitude of the sexual glands, then the entire nervous system could be preserved in perfect activity. Therefore, decrepitude and old age would not exist. That is obvious. Therefore, through this subtle artifice, the connection of the lingam yoni without the ejaculation of the ens seminis, as stated by the renowned doctors Arnold Crum Heller and Brown, it is possible to keep the sexual glands active throughout the entire life. This means that a man who practices this system can reach the age of 90 or 100 years while still retaining the capacity for copulation and for the enjoyment of sexual pleasure, a legitimate pleasure, not a sin, not a taboo, and not a reason for shame or dissimulation. I repeat once again, it is a legitimate right. Now, through the transmutation of the entity of the semen into energy, extraordinary physiological changes occur. The pineal gland develops. This gland was active in remote times. At that time, the human being possessed the eye of which Homer speaks in his Odyssey, the eye of the Lastrygonians, the eye of that terrible giant who tried to devour him. The eye of the Lastrygonians is not a mere legend without foundation. Through sexual transmutation, this gland develops and becomes active once again. This is the eye that allows us to perceive the ultra of everything. Our world is not merely three-dimensional, as the illustrious ignoramuses believe. Our world exists in a fourth vertical dimension, and we can even emphatically affirm that it exists in fifth, sixth, and seventh vertical dimensions. This means that we have never seen our world as it truly is, and we have not seen it because our five senses are degenerated and because our pineal gland is atrophied. There are other senses of perception that are also degenerated. If we manage to regenerate them, we will be able to perceive the world as it is, with its 7 dimensions. Thus, the crude reality of the facts is that through sexual transmutation, it is possible to regenerate the pineal gland and the other atrophied senses. In this way, we could gain access to extraordinary knowledge, to the superior dimensions of nature and the cosmos. We could see, hear, and touch the great realities of life and death. We could grasp all cosmic phenomena as they truly are, and not as they merely appear. Transmutation is the key, to change the sperm, to transform it into energy. The time has come to understand all of this fully. If a man were to commit himself to fulfilling this simple formula, the artifice taught by Brown, Crum Heller, and the medieval alchemists, I could say emphatically and with absolute certainty that such a man would, in the long run, transform himself into a Superman. We must feel the need to change, to transform ourselves into something different if we are not reactionary, for conservative and backward people do not wish to change. However, when one is truly revolutionary, one wants to be different, to change fundamentally, to become a Superman, and to make Nietzsche's doctrine a reality. It is possible to change through sexual transmutation. Sexual force brought us into the field of life, and this cannot be denied. We exist and live because we had a father and a mother. In final synthesis, the root of our own life lies in the copulation of a man and a woman. Now, if sexual force, the energy of sex, had the power to bring us into the field of life, then obviously it is the only force that has the authority to transform us radically. In the world, there are many ideologies and beliefs. Everyone is free to believe what they wish, but the only force that has the authority to transform us is the energy that created us, the one that brought us into the field of life. I am speaking of the sexual force. To learn how to handle this marvelous sexual energy means to become Lord of creation. When the sacred sperm is transformed into energy, extraordinary psychosomatic changes occur. We know well what the hormonal cups of our gonads are, how they function, and how the hormones pass from one reservoir to another until they finally reach the prostate through the spermatic channels. We also know how valuable the prostate is. Within it occur the greatest transformations of the entity of the semen, and the hormones finally enter the bloodstream. The word hormone comes from a Greek root meaning impulse of being, force of being. Hormones have been studied by scientists and are truly marvelous. When sexual hormones enter the bloodstream, they generate wonders. When they reach the endocrine glands, the thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal glands, thymus, and so forth, they stimulate them, causing these small microlaboratories to produce more and more hormones. All of these hormones enrich the bloodstream extraordinarily, and then pains and illnesses disappear. Unfortunately, today, the prepared sperm that ascends to the prostate is wasted, and the famous spermatozoid does not even have time to be decomposed among the hormones before it is already expelled from the organism. Many times, the entity of the semen cannot even ascend from the testicles to the prostate before it is eliminated. Speaking of masturbators, what can we say? You know very well what the vice of masturbation is. When someone masturbates, he is undoubtedly committing a transgression against nature. After the ejaculation of the entity of the semen, there is a peristaltic movement in the phallus, and this is known to any man. With this movement, the phallus normally takes from the uterus of the woman the energy it needs in order to nourish the brain. However, with masturbation, everything is different. During masturbation, the phallus absorbs cold air through the peristaltic movement, and in this way, many cerebral faculties become extinct. Many have ended up in madhouses because of the abominable vice of masturbation. A brain filled with air is a brain that is 100% stupid. Therefore, we condemn this vice completely. It is different when the sacred sperm is transmuted into energy, but this is only possible during copulation, avoiding at all costs the ejaculation of the ens seminis, because, as was stated by the greatest medieval sages, within it resides the ens virtutis of the fire, that is, the igneous entity of fire. To enrich the blood is not, for me, a transgression. To transmute the sperm into energy is well documented by men such as Sigmund Freud and many others. What truly matters is to make good use of sexual potency in order to semenize the brain and to develop the pineal gland, the hypophysis, and others. In this way, one attains a marvelous organic transformation. The psychosomatic field is intimately related to sexuality. Suprasexuality also implies something suprasexual in the psychosomatic field. For this reason, I say clearly that Hermes Trismegistus, Quetzalcoatl, Buddha, Yeshua ben Pandira, that is, the great Kabir, Jesus, were suprasexuals. They were suprasexual beings. The suprasexual man is Nietzsche's Superman. One can reach the heights of the Superman by entering the field of suprasexuality, knowing how to enjoy love and woman, knowing how to live with happiness, with more emotion and less useless reasoning. Emotion is what truly counts and is more valuable than anything else. Thus, from a revolutionary point of view, we can become true God-men if we wish. It would be enough to regenerate the areas of the brain, to make them function, and then we would transform the world into something better. However, I believe, and it is indispensable to know, that the key to degeneration is also the key to regeneration. The wise men of ancient times spoke of the solar fire that exists in all organic and inorganic matter. Naturally, this fire is enclosed within the seminal system of man. Of course, it is not a physical fire. It is a superdimensional, psychological, and metaphysical. That fohat, a word that means fire of a strictly sexual kind, which all of us feel during copulation, can unfold and develop in order to ascend from our seminal system through the spinal medullary channel. When this fire ascends, it awakens powers that we ignore, extraordinary powers of perfection, or better said, of extrasensory perception, powers that divinize. But it is necessary to awaken it through the transmutation of the libido, knowing how to enjoy love. The woman can also awaken it, knowing how to enjoy her male. With this fire, it is possible to perform prodigies. The Orientals call it kundalini, and it is marvelous. Our Mexican ancestors called it the serpent because they said it takes the form of a sacred serpent that ascends through the spinal medullary channel. The Orient knows of the existence of 7 centers located along the spinal column, magnetic centers that can be perfectly studied with the help of special plates, magnetized needles, and other investigative methods. The first is located in the coccyx and confers certain powers over the element of earth. The second is at the level of the prostate and confers powers over the liquid elements of our organism. The third is at the level of the navel, and once awakened, it allows us to control our ardent temperament and even to act upon universal fire. The fourth is at the level of the heart and obviously confers extraordinary faculties such as telepathy, intuition, and many others. The fifth is at the level of the thyroid gland, which secretes biological iodine and grants extraordinary psychic powers such as clairaudience, the power to hear the sounds of the ultra. The sixth is at the level of the eyebrows and grants the power to perceive the superior dimensions of nature and the cosmos. The seventh is at the level of the pineal gland and grants the power to directly perceive the mysteries of life and death. Thus, all these faculties exist in a latent state within our organism and can be awakened by that extraordinary fire that Hindus call kundalini, which ascends through the medullary channel by means of sexual transmutation. However, to reach these heights, it is necessary to work with this secretum secretorium throughout one's entire life.
He who does so will transform himself into a superman and will be able to penetrate the amphitheater of cosmic science, the university of pure science, and resolve problems that official science has not yet resolved. As you say, copulation is carried out while trying not to ejaculate the entity of the semen. So what do you want to attain with that? Everything one seeks with this simple artifice taught by Brown Séquard and the Oneida commune is to copulate without the ejaculation of the entity of the semen, because the wise men say that through this artifice one attains the transformation of the sacred sperm into energy. Thus, what ascends to the brain is not the sperm itself, otherwise we would go mad, but the energy of that sperm. This is called transmutation. One can enjoy sexual pleasure without weakening oneself. Normally, after copulation, one feels a certain repugnance, but if one does not ejaculate the entity of the semen, after copulation one feels the desire to repeat it 1,000,000 times, always enjoying it happily and never weakening oneself. This is what the Oneida commune teaches in the United States, and this is what Jung taught. This is what the greatest sages of the earth teach in all corners of the world. That is all. What is the entity of the semen? Well, when we speak of the entity of the semen, we are referring to the sacred sperm, the semen itself. However, using a more delicate language, it is called the entity of the semen, and in an even more delicate form so that people do not become frightened, it is called ens seminis. Another question? Those who are normally called masochists, to what kind of sexuality would they be classified? Well, the masochist has some similarity with the sadist, but instead of abusing others like the sadist, and as the Marquis de Sade so enthusiastically advocated, he feels pleasure in horribly mortifying himself. Certainly, he is an infrasexual being who belongs to the sphere of Lilith, speaking in the language of the ancient sages. Inferential peace. Samael Aun Weor.